Romantic poems came at a time in American history where Americans really needed an identity. At the time, America was relatively new and there were many immigrants, which is okay. However, Americans needed a clear cut example of, hey, we're Americans, this is what we do, and this is what we're like. You see, before the Romantic era, that didn't really exist. You didn't really see it, and on top of that, America was still in development. They were still building each other up. Especially when we look at early Romantic poems, because these came during the time of the Industrial Revolution. Streets and cities were dirty, crime was rising, and people just really needed an escape. Many people, transcendentalists, I don't know if I said that right, man. These people wrote about a utopian future and they believed that humanity could get better. Take Henry David Thoreau and his resistance to civil government writing for an example. The first line almost, I kid you not, perfectly describes what I've been saying. And it's this. He says, I heartily accept the motto that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Here we have a clear-cut example of American identity. First sentence, boom, end quotes. You just fought the British a couple decades ago, so now you're wondering how your government should form. Thoreau says it right here, clear-cut. Clear-cut. This idea is also based on the bigger idea that Americans are strong, independent people, and they don't need a government to control them, unlike other countries where you would actually see that. Speaking of strong... I can't do that transition. Speaking of strong, independent Americans, Ralph Waldo Emerson. That is quite a name. He's also a strong example of a transcendentalist writer. In an excerpt from his writing Self-Reliance, which I love, it states this: Whoso, which like nobody says nowadays, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal palms must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Now, the first lines I've given so far are like the best ones, but how can I not? This first line is a strong idea of American independence as an identity and how people should not conform to other people and other groups. Emerson states this idea of independence, but also more importantly, the idea of exploring it. This also leads to a big portion of nature and exploring nature, which was a big portion in a lot of writings in this era. When you consider the audience for these writings as well, you can see how influential these are. These people are in a time of needing an identity, and these people over here are telling them how to do that and how to find it themselves. Overall, just like this entire idea is very uplifting. What's not uplifting, however, is dark romanticism. They also talked about an American identity, American heroes and, nature. However, where normal romantics would talk about, the upbringing of humanity and how humanity could get better, dark romanticism's kind of focused on that kind of negative light and actually the darkness behind humanity. They weren't afraid to acknowledge the existence of, evil, pain, sin, whatever. Evil and horror were actually important and interesting factors in some of these writings. Also in these writings, you would usually see the narrator / protagonist explore the darkness in themselves during these writings. Take James Russell in his poem, The First Snowfall. Specifically these lines: I stood and watched by the window the noiseless work of the sky and the sudden flurries of snowbirds, like brown leaves whirling by. I thought of a mountain sweet Auburn where a little headstone stood, how the flakes were floating it gently, as did robins the babes in the wood. In this story, we know that a child unfortunately passes away because of that little headstone. And the reason why I chose these lines is because you get that idea of exploration of somebody's darkness, throughout these, 8 lines or something. He's exploring nature, and you still feel sympathy for him, but it's very dark and it's just very off-putting. This entire poem ensures that humanity can still feel darkness and how some people even identify with that darkness. Another example, in my opinion, is The Rope Walk by Henry Longfellow. The story opens up with a man daydreaming at his rope factory job where he is, get this, making a rope. And during this, he starts to wander off and start thinking about the uses for the rope he's making. There are some positive ideas in this story, such as two fair maidens in a swing, like white doves upon the wing, first before my vision pass, laughing as their gentle hands closely clasp the twisted strands at their shadow on the grass. And then there are people hanging themselves a few stanzas later, but this brings me to my point. I feel like Longfellow had one main idea, and that one main idea was basically like, I'm gonna write what people are thinking, but no one is saying. Nobody wants to admit the dark sides of a city, such as people hanging themselves, but they do want to focus on two girls swinging on a swing. The idea of escapism also runs well throughout this entire poem. Escapism is a very strong idea in, you guessed it, identity. Why conform yourself to one idea when you have multiple ideas that you see? Well, why not take action on these ideas? Overall, Romanticism and the Romanticism era was a very important step in American history. With the events that were taking place during this era, it inspired multiple Americans during that time to take action on what they thought was right, and that eventually leads us to what we know as America today. Video's over. I'm done. Turn it off.